The world is watching. Your mother, the world is watching. Your mother, your sisters, your daughters. And I want to be unequivocally clear that there is only one way to spell equality, and that is simply E-R-A!
On January 27th of this year, Virginia became the 38th and final state needed to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment.
Our message here today is quite simple. We want in. We want in the Constitution of the United States of America.
On February 13th, the House of Representatives dissolved the time limit on the amendment. We need the Senate to act now. We are so close to fixing our Constitution so that it prohibits discrimination based on one's sex.
We've worked on the ground and on Capitol Hill since 2014 and now introduce our new leadership team to carry the work forward. Kimberly Peeler-Allen, chair of the ERA Coalition, comes to us from the world of electing women to public office.
I fight for the Equal Rights Amendment because the only way we are truly to have equality for every single American in this country is if we make bold, substantive, and structural changes to how we operate. And the ERA will do that.
And S.Mona Sinha, chair of the Fund for Women's Equality, brings the expertise of international finance and social investment.
The ERA stands for Equal Rights for All. Not only that, it stands for equal resources for all. If we don't have equal resources, we can't have equal rights. This is why I do the work. It's really important. Join us.
Welcome to our new leadership.
Hello, and thanks so much for joining us. I'm Carol Jenkins. I'm co-president and CEO of the ERA Coalition and the Fund for Women's Equality. We're thrilled you're with us tonight to meet our chairs, and we hope you will come work with us as we try to provide an equal future for every person in America. Jessica?
Thanks, Carol. I am delighted to be here with all of you today to greet our two new chairs, Mona Sinha and Kimberly Peeler-Allen. When we first started in 2014, I never thought we would get this far this quickly. So much has happened, and constitutional equality is now within our immediate reach. Mona and Kimberly will lead us across the finish line, a very exciting moment in history. I look forward to working with them and celebrating recognition of the ERA as the 28th Amendment to the Constitution, almost 100 years after it was first introduced in Congress. A very warm welcome to Kimberly and Mona.
Thank you, Jessica and Carol. I am Alyssa Milano, and I am on the advisory council for the ERA Coalition, and it's some of my proudest work. I am just so excited to be here and meet you both and hear about your vision for the ERA Coalition. And I think I'm really excited because we all have small children, I believe. And so, I keep thinking about how close we are to passing the Equal Rights Amendment and what that would mean for our kids' generation. And it's really exciting to me. What do you feel? What are you feeling when you think about that?
Well, for me, my children are still in, I have one in middle school and one in elementary school. Well, one just started elementary school, got a kindergartner. And to think about just a way to remove all the barriers that are facing my daughter in particular, who is in seventh grade. And I remember during the 2016 election, she was just baffled by the fact that people were saying that a woman couldn't be president. And that was just the tip of the iceberg for her, and just to be able to know that she can achieve anything that she wants, that she will be paid what she is worth, she will be paid equal pay for equal work, that she will not have barriers put up in front of her because she is a woman, and for my son for him to know that there is true equality, because he is also picking up, at the ripe age of 6, that there are
of course,
people perceive differences between girls and boys, and he's just like, I don't understand. And so much of that is culture. So much of that is what is on the books and in our laws, and to be able to know that both of them can walk fully in their power is very inspiring as a mom.
Yeah, I think it'll send a strong message to our girls, but also a strong message to our boys. How about you, Mona?
Well, to that point, my boy is 21, so he's an adult, and he proudly calls himself a feminist. So for him, it's great to see that strong women in his family and his grandmoms and so forth, had to overcome a lot of barriers, and hopefully his generation will not. And there will be equality all around. And his sisters, I have twin girls who are 18, and so they vote for the first time in this election, which is really exciting because they can actually, demonstrate that they have a voice, hopefully, in the next administration, and they can stand in their own selves and their own power as young women. And hopefully not have to face some of the discrimination and some of the barriers that I did when I started my career, for sure.
I think it's so, when I think about the fact that if Bella is 6, and, if we lived in Iceland or Rwanda, we would already have equal rights under their constitutions. Right. And yet here we are still fighting this fight. And I really want, and through the journey, I have tried to teach Bella as much as humanly possible. Obviously, when I started with the ERA Coalition, she was very young, but just for her to be able to see that that organizing and coalition building and lobbying for something that is important might actually lead the outcome that we all hope for, I think is going to be a strong lesson as well, to see the fight, and I want to be in this fight for her.
I took my girls, Anya and Ria, to the House of Representatives when we had the bill on the floor to remove the deadline for the passage of the ERA. And they were just shocked that there were actually women who were against it. They were like, Mom, how can this be? And it was just so interesting. It was such a life lesson for them.
What did you say to them?
Well, I said people's judgments are affected by how they grow up and their circumstances. And, reproductive rights is a very thorny issue. A lot of people believe very strongly that their faith makes them act this way. And at the end of the day, as women, we need to have the choice to do what we want and the control over our own bodies. So I think they were really thinking about that. I could see they were deep in thought when we were on the train back home to New York.
Do you think that, I look at my daughter and my son, and I don't think that they can, even though I've told them, I don't think they can fully grasp the fact that boys make more money than girls in the same jobs. I don't think because, like you said before, it just seems like such a foreign thing that everyone should not be equal, especially in this country.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely something that young minds, which I think we really need to take a lot of our leads from, because they're not jaded, and they have, particularly children, just have such a fairness and equality, and your piece is a little bigger than mine, so I'm mad.
Right.
So much of who they are and how they see the world. And if we could take a step back from our life experience and say, let's think back to when we were on the playground, and everybody got 5 potato chips, everybody got a turn to do the same thing, and everybody was happy. And it's only when we put in these patriarchal constructs that actually make the differentiation between the genders, that we, it's this artificial construct that, now we find ourselves in a place where we have to go remind ourselves of what life was like when things were simpler. So, it's definitely that fight that we show our children. My daughter is like, are we going to a march? Because we need to go to a march. So she's fully aware, which is also a great inspiration for me that we are building this path for her, but also with her. And she is very committed to continuing the fight because she sees injustice. And, we think so much, now that we're so close to getting to actually codifying the ERA into the Constitution, now that we have the 38 states, and now we have to go through get the deadline lifted, and we'll probably end up in the courts. But now that we're so close, we're now starting to think about what's next and what is that next fight, or how can we build this out even further, and strengthen the ERA even more. And that's something that I think Mona and we've spent a lot of time thinking about since we became chairs. And that's been I think probably the most exciting work of, okay, we're almost here. So what's next? So that's something that we're.
And what do you see being next?
I think, as Kimberly said, we have to really build this for the values of the future generations. And I have great hope in the next generation because they are very fair, and it's all about equality, and it's all about non-discrimination, and it's all about supporting each other in this journey. So we are building it for them, but with them as well. I think what's next is we have to imagine what a lived equality is going to look like. What's it going to look like in the education system so that everybody can have equal access and everybody can have the same opportunities and the same scaffolding? What's it going to look like in healthcare? We've seen in this pandemic how it's been so unequal on so many fronts, right? And so having a codified ERA is hopefully going to remove those barriers that have been so built into the systems. But frankly, they were built to serve. So they're not doing anything unusual, but it's just, shining a light on the fact that equality is not ever present in the American dream. And so too with legal rights, with domestic violence, with all the things that we've been seeing, once the ERA is actually an amendment, these things cannot be taken for granted, and these things have to be challenged. And there will be a system then in place for them to receive their due right in people's lives.
And it's women's health care in general. I mean, not just during the pandemic. I'm hopeful that we'll have greater health respect, and especially when you look at maternal death rates for Black women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Just access to healthcare. And we see this as a tremendous step forward in closing the health disparities between Black women, people of color in general. And because there's just so much between heart disease, cancer rates, as you said, the maternal mortality rate, there's so much that is tied to race and gender, and that intersection of not seeing or treating patients the same way, and even just the access to high quality healthcare is still something that so many Americans struggle with. And this pandemic has really just exposed all of the challenges and the shortcomings of our system, from as Mona was saying, the education system, the healthcare system, these essential workers who are predominantly Black and brown women who are not getting paid what they are worth, full day, equal pay for equal work. And so that all of this has just really showed how much we need the ERA. If anybody had any questions before, being able to say you cannot discriminate in any way, shape, or form because of sex is just something that will just really, I think, really change so many lives. But I think the key is going to be the implementation and the adherence to the law as we then continue to build on it.
Hello, Aijen. It's so lovely to be in conversation with you. You are such a force in championing our workers and our care economy. And as we've seen during COVID, who are the essential workers, right? It's all those women who care for us in our homes, for our children, in the healthcare system, in the farms. So tell us how the passage of the ERA is going to impact your work and have a meaningful difference to the lives of these brave people.
Well, as we know, so many of the industries where our essential workers are working are industries that are predominantly women and people of color. And it's amazing how long we've just kind of taken this work for granted. And the beauty of this moment of crisis is that so much has been revealed about the incredible contributions of women and women of color in particular to holding up our economy and to keeping us safe and ensuring our health and well-being. And what the ERA will do is really holistically recognize, value, and protect that work. 2/3, coming into the pandemic, 2/3 of all minimum wage workers were women. And that means that women were working incredibly hard and still not able to make ends meet. And what the ERA helps us do is put a gender lens on every aspect of our society and our economy so that we can protect and value and create an economy that is much more sustainable for women and ultimately for all of us.
That's so true. And this, it also casts an intersectional lens because, as you said, it certainly is gender. Women do this tough work of caring, and a lot of women of color, as we have seen. The economic devastation has just been stunning to watch. And I think it behooves us as citizens of this free country that we have to uplift and recognize these women. So thank you. Thank you so much for the work you're doing.
Well, thank you. And we should be thanking our caregivers, our care workers who work so hard every single day to keep our families safe, to make sure that the people that we love the most have the care and support that they need. And just to say that the women who have disproportionately borne the brunt of caring, as we know, have been Black women and other women of color throughout our nation's history. And we have never invested in this workforce or protected this workforce. And in fact, we've systematically excluded this workforce from equal protections under the law. And that is what the ERA will help us address, is all of the racial and gender-based exclusions and injustices that have been codified in our laws.
Yeah, that's so absolutely true. And I know you, like many of us, wear multiple hats because we all know that there's so much work to be done, and we have to move in so many different ways to be able to move the needle. And, particularly now that we are, still in mourning, having lost the amazing Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg just a few weeks ago. And, it's still very raw. Looking at, we definitely have the organizing for our domestic workers and that work, but we also have, what Justice Ginsburg just fought tirelessly for, which was equality for women. And through your hat of Supermajority, which is an organization that is working to help make sure that women are the supermajority, because we are 51% of the population. And using multiple angles to try and achieve that goal so that we have our political power, our voices heard, and we are fully supported in the American society. Would love to see. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how you see or how you made the segue from Domestic Workers Alliance to Supermajority, and how that fits into the bigger equality landscape and movement as we try and move this forward and actually get it codified into the Constitution.
Well, I think that we all know that women are powering this economy and our society at every level, and have been the most potent force for change in this country for a long time. We are the supermajority, right? And yet our issues and our priorities and our concerns are still treated as special interest, right? Siloed. And I think the opportunity of this moment is to say the women's agenda, the equality agenda, is the agenda, right? That our concerns and our priorities should be the concerns and priorities of everyone in leadership. Everyone who wants to lead this country forward should have the interests and concerns of women front and center, right? Our issues cannot be siloed or treated as second class or special interest any longer. And that is the spirit behind Supermajority. I think we've been listening to women across communities all over the country. And what we've heard time and time again is that women want to address systemic racism head on. Women want to address gender inequality head on. Women want leaders at every level of government who will end this COVID-19 crisis and put us on a path to recovery, not back to the normal, right? Back to the way that things were before, but actually to design a future where each of us can be powerful in our democracy and in our economy. That is possible, and that is what women can help us deliver.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. One other question, as we look aspirationally, because we are so close to actually having it codified, having the ERA codified into the Constitution as the 28th Amendment. And we know that that is the floor and not the ceiling. What would we're asking all of our guests to dream with us, because we know that once it is codified, that is, like voting is step one, codification is step one. How do we continue to enhance this rich piece of legislation, or this rich amendment, to really make sure that it has all of the enforcements, that it has all of the aspects that, this was something that was written 100 years ago. So there's definitely things that need to be added. But what would you say would be like your first priority after it's codified and the law of the land? How would you expand it?
Well, I think we need to continue to organize no matter what, right? Laws must be embodied, enforced, and then built upon, as you said. It will be the foundation for all of us to dream. And for us, we have a dream of what we call universal family care. The idea that in this country, we should have universal access to childcare, to paid leave, to long-term care and support for people with disabilities, that all of us as working families deserve fundamentally the ability to be able to take care of our families while we're working. And the ERA lays a foundation and a groundwork for us to be able to build towards that dream of universal family care, where we invest in our caregiving systems as fundamental infrastructure in this country, and where every job in our caregiving infrastructure, every care job can be a living wage, dignified job with real opportunity and mobility, where one generation can do better than the next. And I think all of that becomes so much more possible with the foundation of the ERA. But we've got to organize. We've got to keep organizing, right? We've got to get the ERA across the finish line, and then we have to keep building our power and our capacity to win.
Again, I'm so grateful for you. We're both so grateful for you and your partnership in getting this across that threshold. We are close. So let's keep doing what we're doing and make it happen.
I can feel it, and I can feel RBG behind us as we keep on fighting. She's watching.
Yes. Yes, she is definitely watching and cheering us on. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation with the chairs of the Fund for Women's Equality and the ERA Coalition. We are so grateful for your work and, as Mona said, your continued partnership as we work to make this country truly equal for everyone. Thank you so much and have a great night.
Thank you so much for your leadership. We love you so much.
Way-oh, 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 I've been walking with my face turned to the sun. Way-oh, weight on my shoulder, pulling well, I got eyes in the back of my head, just in case I have to run. Do what I can when I can, while I can for my people. While the clouds roll back and the stars fill the night, that's why I'm gonna stand up, take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home, far across the river. Can you hear freedom calling, calling me to answer? Gonna keep on keeping on, I can feel it in my bones. And I know what's around the bend might be hard to face, 'cause I'm alone. And I just might fail, but Lord knows I tried. Sure as stars fill up the sky, stand up, take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home, far across the river. You hear freedom calling, calling me to answer. Gonna keep on keeping on, I can feel it in my bones. I know to prepare a place for you. I know to prepare a place for you. I know to prepare a place for you. I know to prepare a place for you.
Hi, everyone. Patricia Arquette here. Thanks for coming. I wanted to take this moment to welcome Mona and Kimberly, and I want to thank the board and Carol, Jessica, and Bettina for all your hard work on the ground. In 2019, I was asked to address the House Judiciary Committee on the need for the Equal Rights Amendment. And I feel now more than ever that we really need to make sure that this happens. But luckily, we're in a much better position than we were in 2019. because some very important things have happened. We now have the 38th state, and the House has dissolved the time limit. So now all we need is the Senate to do the same. Here's my testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Nadler, Chairman Cohen, Ranking Members Johnson and Collins, and Congresswomen Spear and Maloney for your tireless work on the ERA, and to the members of the committee. I come here not as a constitutional lawyer, but as a citizen, as an American woman, to advocate for what I feel is critical for our country. I come with the goodwill and the faith that when we examine the reality of women in America today and remember the historic injustices women have faced in our country, we will all feel compelled to do what we must to ensure that women are afforded every legal right and equal protection in our country. Women have waited 232 years to be enshrined as full and equal citizens. Why? Because in 1787, women were left out of the Constitution intentionally. While the Constitution says nothing about deadlines for amendments, Congress put a deadline on the Equal Rights Amendment when it was passed in 1972. I am here to appeal to you to remove the 1982 deadline placed on Congress for the ratification of the ERA. Just because women didn't achieve full equality in America by 1978 or by 1982 doesn't mean they shouldn't have it today. There's a groundswell in this country. Women are being elected in record numbers. Women are rising up by the millions and saying they will not be sexually assaulted. They will not be paid less. They will not be treated as subhuman, and they will have their voices heard. Some people think women do have constitutional protections because of the 14th Amendment. But when asked about this, Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia said, certainly the Constitution doesn't require discrimination on the basis of sex. The question is whether it prohibits it. It doesn't. So a recent Supreme Court justice interpreted the Constitution as saying it did not prohibit discrimination on the basis of sex. So whether you agree with him or not, the fact remains, this is how a recent Supreme Court justice interpreted women's rights in our Constitution. And this is why we need to amend the Constitution and leave no room to question if women have full constitutional equality, because women's protections cannot be left to interpretation alone. So let's look at the treatment of women in America today. These are present-day truths. These are not antiquated horrors we have to search for in history books. These are things that are happening to both Democratic and Republican women. In America, in 2019, there are estimated to be hundreds of thousands of untested evidentiary rape kits across the nation. Only half our states mandate the timely testing of evidence contained in these rape kits. Many victims are being billed for the collection of their own forensic evidence. Countless emergency rooms and hospitals don't even have trained staff to collect evidence in rape kits, even though it's estimated that 1/4 of all women in America will be raped in their lifetime. In some states in America today, women can be forced to co-parent with their convicted rapists. And incarcerated women up until 3 months ago could be forced to give birth while shackled to beds. We have the only rising mortality rate in the developed world. American women, especially African American, Latina, and Native American women, are dying of pregnancy-related complications here on the wealthiest nation on earth. And we know the gender pay gap is having devastating consequences for women and their families, especially women of color. We know 98% of all jobs, women are paid less. According to the Census Bureau, 4 million women over 65 years old are living in poverty. But if they had equal pay, more than 2.5 million children with working single mothers would be lifted out of poverty. These are just a few examples of how systemic bias against women is expressed in America. Why? Because women don't have the same value as men in our country. That was true in 1787. It was true in 1982. It is true in 2019. So I hope By now, we are all ready to make women's equality a bedrock American value and enshrine it in the U.S. Constitution. I hope we're ready for all our mothers, daughters, sisters, and friends to have full equal rights. Why didn't women achieve full constitutional equality in 1787 or 1982? Because the country wasn't ready? Well, I hope you're ready now. Because women have been waiting 232 years for equality in this country, and it's failed them. Legislators have blocked the passage of the Equal Rights Amendment for decades, but we're done waiting. Thank you.
I'm so grateful to this organization, and I myself am making a contribution. And I encourage you, if you're able and if it's in your heart, to do the same.
I also get really excited about what it means for the rest of the world, because, you know, I'm an ambassador for UNICEF, and I see the disparity in education and women's health, you know, in these developing nations, and it's heartbreaking. And I'm so hopeful that once we do this, that other countries that might not have women in their constitution at this point, or have less women have less equality in that country, that they will feel empowered to fight for this. I mean, that's the beauty of what we saw from the Me Too movement, was that it started in this country, but it ended up everywhere. Right. And that's such the idea that this might also be that, I think is really special. You know, I think so often we live with these arbitrary lines in the sand that, you know, separate us in a way that doesn't necessarily need to be there. And if we, by evolving our constitution, can help women throughout the world reach their equality, then what an incredible thing.
Absolutely. Well, I tell you, the world looks at the U.S. as a leader, right? I mean, we are the leader of the free world, and we have to step into that leadership and say, you can do this, and we can help you get it right. So we really need to get it right ourselves first before we can showcase that to the rest of the world.
We've certainly had long enough to try to figure it out. Exactly. When I think about, a lot this idea of, and you know, I think any of us that are in this space of advocacy work can relate to this, that that we have to almost be okay with not seeing the end result. And that's hard. That is hard to work towards something and then just be okay that it might be when we pass that happens. And I think about Alice Paul all the time when I'm thinking about, like, okay, well, I planted that seed. I might not be alive to see it turn into a tree, but then I think of Alice Paul. I'm like, talk about a seed that has, taken forever to cultivate and to see come into fruition.
Yeah, it's definitely, as we started the conversation, we're talking about and doing this work for future generations. And we just have to do all that we can to continue to push the boulder forward, and know that for every inch that we are being able to move it, and it stays there, that it is another opportunity for a young girl, for a person of color, for an LGBTQ individual to stand in their full power and achieve full equality. And we may not get to, as Martin Luther King said, I may not get to the mountaintop with you, but to know that we did our part. And I think that's so much of this moment. I know for me, why I stepped into, raised my hand and said, I would like to stand for chair of the ERA coalition, was because I know that my daughter is watching me, and I want to be able to say to her when she looks back and says, the 2010s and the early 2020s were such a revolutionary time in American history. What did you do your part? What did you do? And I can say that I fought for equality, and for your equality, for your daughter's equality, and her daughter's equality.
Kimberly, you just gave me chills.
I know, me too. The hair on the back of my head.
But as Gloria Steinem, who's a big fan of the ERA as well, she says, I light your torch so you can light the one in front of you. And that's exactly what we're doing. It's a relay race in a way, but we're not handing off our torches. We're actually just lighting the ones for future generations to go forward. But this one's got to be lit now. This one's got to be, I think, 100 years is long enough, right?
The time is now. The time is now. For sure. And, I think that accountability is a big theme that we're seeing. And I think, after Me Too, we've seen how differently people act when they know they're being held accountable, right? I mean, like even the richest and the most powerful men are finally seeing that it doesn't matter how rich or powerful they may be, there will be consequences for their actions. And I think because of that, right? Because, people are being ostracized and almost shamed for either predatory behavior or inequality practices. It's important that they know they will be held accountable. And what an amazing thing to have the weight of the Constitution to be able to hold people accountable for those injustices. And so it makes sense to me that the time is right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. I mean, they should be also held accountable by our justice system.
Yeah. But the Constitution is the beginning, right? That's the bedrock of what lays the ground for anything that happens in this country. So for it not to be codified in the Constitution leaves a big gaping hole in there, which, the legal system could certainly do its part, but then depending on who comes into power, that can be overturned or overruled. But if it's actually codified, then that makes it a little bit more difficult to change it.
Right. Well, we're seeing what an administration that doesn't believe in equality can do in just 4 years. So it's very important that we do codify it.
Absolutely. As we've been talking within the organization and to our members, equality is on the ballot. It is absolutely on the ballot from state houses to the halls of Congress to the White House. And, we just ask people to think, we don't live single issue lives. So let's not vote on single issues and look at the totality. And in that totality of our candidates and our elected officials' records, let's really look broadly at where they are on equality, where they are on the environment. And if things align with, your beliefs in a broad spectrum, you got to get out there and vote. I think this is an election, regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum, your voice needs to be heard because our democracy thrives on that. And when we don't participate and when we don't engage, that's when democracy dies.
And we also, I want to know, there's 96% of American people are in support of the ERA. Who are the other 4%? Right? I want to know who those people are. I want to call them out. I want to shame them. I want them not to be, to get my business, but I want to tell other people that they should not be getting their business. It's that time. It is that serious that we should know who amongst us does not believe that, and sometimes that's blatantly obvious and sometimes it's not as obvious. But just the fact that there's 4% of people that don't, it's just mind-boggling to me.
Yeah. And that equality is not a single issue. Equality is intersection.
Right.
It crosses so many different issues and so many different identities and everything, that every single human being on this planet is touched by it, right? So you're right. Who are those 4% who think they're not touched by it?
Right. But the beauty, what you're saying is absolutely correct, because what we're fighting for as women, we're fighting for equality through a feminist lens.
Right.
And so of course we're looking at the intersectionality of all of it: gender, race, class, disability, religion, right? Really what we're asking for is the elimination of any kind of hierarchy.
Or barriers, right.
Exactly. That is exactly it. Let's completely and officially level the playing field so that everyone has an opportunity to succeed and to thrive.
That's the American dream.
It seems so, and this is another instance when I always look at my kids, because it seems to them it's so human, right? And then the grown-ups in the room seem to politicize it. And anytime you politicize, I believe you dehumanize. And so I look at my children and I'm so grateful that I have this sort of barometer of just coming from such a place of pure love and happiness and wanting to feel a certain fulfillment. That's all they care about. It's all they want. And so that's what we're fighting for. The purity of their vision of what we can all be.
Yeah.
Right.
It's beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you for supporting the ERA and being such a big champion.
Oh, it's my honor. It's my honor to be in this fight, especially next to the two of you. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Julie Taymor, the director and co-writer of The Glorias. You're about to see a trailer that encapsulates the 80 years of this incredible woman's life. And I had the great fortune of working with Gloria on it for the last 5 years. It's based on her book, My Life on the Road. So what you're going to see is a road picture. And not only is it the 4 Glorias who are in the picture that represent the 6-year-old, the 12-year-old, the 20 to 40, that's Alicia Vikander, and the 40 to 80, which is Julianne Moore, but you're going to meet these other extraordinary feminists and activists like Flo Kennedy, Dorothy Pittman Hughes, Dolores Huerta, Wilma Mankiller, Bella Abzug. I think that's most of them, but also all of the other women in India and on her journeys and at the March on Washington, at the Women's Conference in Houston, who were so much a part of being the composite of what Gloria represents. In the Houston Women's Conference of 1977, we also show the fight for the ERA, for the passing of the ERA. And you'll see the extraordinary cross lines, Republican women, Democratic women, all ages, all races, all economic levels, coming together to fight for the kinds of laws that we put in and that we have great danger of losing. Actually, the ERA, as you all know, wasn't passed. So you're going to see the motions to try and get that to be passed. And it's just astonishing to me now that we have a great danger of going backwards in time. So I hope you enjoy the trailer and then see the film. Thank you.
You're Gloria Steinem.
I am.
It's your thing. Do what you wanna do.
Taking to the road changed who I thought I was.
Travel is the best education. It's the only education, really.
I just returned from 2 years in India. The stories I saw and heard are amazing.
I'm going to try you out on a fashion assignment.
They give her pay cuts if you don't smile, if you don't fit into your costume.
Or if we don't do the bunny dip while serving.
I've been working 9 hours with no break. Maybe we ought to join a union.
How about next time going undercover in the porno business?
Those are too big.
They hide your beautiful face. They're perfect.
Those women in bunny outfits are going to thank you one day.
I have a fear of public speaking. What Dorothy and I have to say is too important not to say it.
This is the year of women's liberation.
A simple right to reproductive freedom is basic.
We're here to make revolution, not just dinner. We gotta stop sucking and begin to bite.
You're working from within the movement now. Change comes from within.
Every minute is a chance to change the world.
Are you lesbians? What are you, the alternative?
I thought I would talk about why Harvard Law School needs women more than women need it.
How dare you?
This is going to be a disaster. Stop the bus.
You're broken down and tired.
Are we there yet?
Living life on the merry-go-round.
This isn't the first time you've had knives thrown at you.
Why didn't I object? Get out and slam the door. You will, lots of times. Speaking your mind will get you in deep trouble. The truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off.
And we'll rise up. I like the way
The road is messy, and the way the real life is messy.
in spite of the age.
It leads us out of denial and into reality. It leads us out of our heads and into our hearts.
Isn't tonight amazing? I'm just so hopeful. And when I became the chair of the ERA Coalition just about 6 months ago, I knew that the time was now, and I had to do all that I could to make sure that the ERA was actually codified into the Constitution and implemented all across our great land. I hope you will join me with this sense of urgency and profound sense of commitment and dig deep. Please give again. We're so grateful for your generosity to join us tonight and all of you who have been continuous supporters. But the time is now. We are almost there. So help us get over this finish line and give. You can click on the link at the bottom of the screen. Thank you.
You may know that I was an executive producer on Disclosure that talked about the misrepresentation of trans lives in the media. And I'm just wondering, what was your impression of that? You know, the main narrative there was that with visibility comes greater harassment and greater danger for some trans communities. If we had the ERA as a constitutional amendment, how would trans lives be different?
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I know that the ERA is significant for many members of our community. And I think it's important for us to understand and really realize, right, that institutional violence has been portrayed against trans and gender nonconforming people for centuries. And obviously, you know, through the policies that are enacted to pretty much try to erase our existence is something that has been pervasive against our community. And certainly the ERA will be, I'm going to say, like a miraculous thing that is going to happen that will obviously support the livelihood of trans and gender nonconforming people. I think it's also important that we understand where trans people are situated in 2020. And unfortunately, because of the global pandemic that we're experiencing right now, it's also important that we understand that trans people are going to be set even further behind than how we were situated in our society. And so the ERA will not just set precedents, but I think will empower our community for us to really advocate for the changes that need to happen in our society in order for us to be a better place and better our livelihood, really.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I know you have been just a tremendous advocate and voice, particularly for people in California, but are recognized nationally and internationally as a very strong advocate. And we are in this space with the on the cusp of having the ERA codified into the Constitution. And it's something that we've been working for so long, but we all also recognize that it is the floor, not the ceiling of opportunity and empowerment for communities across the country. And we've seen a lot of work being done to try and really expand not just the rights that will be provided through the ERA, but through other pieces of legislation and through the legal community. And we had this amazing decision this summer through the Bostock decision that affirmed that the Title VII of the Civil Rights Bill included gender expression, trans individuals, and sexual orientation under the provision that it is prohibited to discriminate under all of those things: sex, race, and gender. And so we're seeing this, but I know that there's just so much more to be done. So, dream with us a little bit. What would you love to see? What are things that are already in the works that will take what will happen when we get the ERA just to the next level? And then what else do we need to do?
Yeah, I think, like you mentioned, just this summer, the fact that the Supreme Court ruled in favor of really not discriminating LGBTQ individuals, in which included obviously trans people in the workplace specifically. But I think it's also important that we understand that the social conditions of trans people are broader. Obviously, employment is one of those things that are essential for everyone, right? And so this is certainly a protection that we have now. But I think even then, it's important for us to understand how what I call the invisible discrimination manifests in the lives of trans people, right? Many people enact or portrays discrimination on a way that is hard to prove, right? Particularly for trans people. But I think the Equal Rights Amendment, my hope really is that will support for all of our community to be empowered enough to not just advocate for the basic needs that we need as a community for us to continue to move forward, but I also believe that it will support for us to start building the infrastructure that we need to build as a community, as a movement. And also through that, we are going to be able to create policies that are inclusive of the needs and issues of our community and how we can best address those. Obviously, the Equal Rights Amendment is really about equity, right? And I am so hopeful. Obviously, our organization is one of the leading organizations that are continue to push forth for the changes that need to happen. But there are also other great trans-led organizations that are doing the same. And I believe that, collectively, we are going to not just set a trans agenda, but but policies that will really change the landscape of our community and that will in turn support a better livelihood for our community. So I'm super hopeful, and it is time. It is time that the era gets to be, at the federal level, right? Like, it's incredible that it hasn't been, enacted, right? Like, there are other countries who have actually have taken this on, and what is happening with this country that is taking them so long?
Well, America is only one of 28 countries in the world, and actually the only industrialized country in the world that does not mandate equality on the basis of sex. So you're right, it has taken way too long. And we are at a pivotal moment right now in our history and in our nation's life. And this pandemic has shown that in ways that we never, ever thought possible. So we're hopeful too, Bamby, with you and with the trans community and other communities that we can finally get this done.
Yeah, and I also want to obviously commend the organizing committee of this session and everyone for including me and including a voice and really for validating my womanhood, right? Because unfortunately, through many movements, that's not necessarily the case. And I am just so grateful and honored that that you've been thoughtful through this process, and that you obviously are understanding also that, we a lot of times talked about liberation, right? But we use terms very loosely. And I believe that if we are fighting to get the liberation for all communities that have been historically marginalized, we cannot leave other communities behind. And I'm just so grateful that you're thinking of us, that you're thinking of our community. And I believe that together we will get to the finish line.
That is our hope. That is our hope. Thank you so much for joining us. And you just are cheering you on from the sidelines, and however we can be of service and in partnership, please let us know. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Bamby.
So we are so excited to welcome, and as we're doing this Meet the Chairs, we're also excited to introduce one of the newest members of our advisory council, Ilyasah Shabazz. Welcome, Ilyasah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be a part of this very important coalition.
Oh, thank you. We're so grateful for your leadership and for your voice, and to have you as part of this process. With all that is in the news over the last several weeks, it is, I think, just important to just take a moment and note, your father, Malcolm X, was just so insightful and had so many amazing words that inspire our steps, so many people's steps to this day. And I think his statement, so many years ago about, the most, I'm gonna bungle the quote, my apologies, the most, unsupported person in America is a Black woman. And to have him make such a profound statement that we see, with the lack of indictment on Breonna Taylor and Say Her Name and all of this, that's to this day, as his daughter, and he left us far before his time, and your mother raised 6 girls, with that knowledge, what has that experience brought to your activism for justice, for human rights, and for equality?
Well, what my father referenced was when that the Black woman is the most disrespected, unprotected, and neglected person in America. And basically, you know, when the most marginal communities are able to flourish and live outside the threat of police violence and have safe and adequate housing, education, healthcare, all of these rights, you know, that should be ours simply by being human, then we know everyone's needs are being met. For my mother, you know, she lived through her home being firebombed. A week later, she witnessed her husband being gunned down. She had 4 babies, infant babies, and she was pregnant with my twin sisters. And, you know, I often asked her after, of course, I was an adult, because while I was growing up, she just seemed to be very loving, very kind, and somewhat invincible. And she made sure that her daughters had a solid foundation, that they were well prepared. They were filled with self-love, joy, peace, all of these things that every smart, forward-thinking adult wants for their children. And one of the things that I witnessed with my mother is that she never accepted, no, I can't, as an answer for herself. And, you know, not only did she safeguard her husband's legacy, but she protected her babies. She educated other children at Medgar Evers College, really around the world. And it was that notion that, you know, Black power isn't exclusionary, right? Women's rights, they aren't exclusionary. It's total. And it says that no one is free until all of us are free. You know, that we are a part of this human family, and we want to be at the table making these decisions and making sure that future generations also can share in, you know, the rights that should be theirs ordained by God, not for a man to determine, you know, whether or not we are equal to them.
So true, Ilyasah. I mean, what powerful words. And we stand on the shoulders of these great people who went ahead of us, our foremothers and our fathers. What is the legacy you hope to leave behind? I mean, we believe, Kimberly, myself, and the rest of the team on the ERA Coalition and the Fund for Women's Equality, that now is the time to have the ERA codified as the 28th Amendment into our Constitution, which really, if that happens, and it will happen, what legacy does that allow us to leave our children and our grandchildren, just as the ones that you're carrying on your shoulders?
Yes. Well, you listen, we're all a part of the human family, and that's really it. And, you know, my father said something like, this generation will be the generation that really gets it. We saw that during these COVID months, there were 50 states of people marching, protesting, and demonstrating in the support of our human rights. They believed in the lives for Black people. They believed in human rights for everyone. We saw people in 18 countries abroad saying that, listen, these people have been in power for too long and they've misused the power. And now there has got to be a change, and we are willing to stand up. We're willing to roll up our sleeves and do the work that's necessary to ensure equal rights for all human beings across the board.
Yeah, that is absolutely our ultimate goal of how do we truly get equality for all of us. You know, it's not just a woman's issue. It's not just for people of color. It's not just for our LGBTQ brothers and sisters. It's for all of us. And you know, thinking about our fight, our collective fight for the entire human family. You know, as we are now kind of on this cusp of getting the ERA in the Constitution, you know, it's like, now what is the next frontier? What is the next piece that we need to put in place? And, you know, something that is, you know, not necessarily being focused on right now, but absolutely deserves that attention. And that's something that we've been talking about all night, because I think this is not just this one moment. This is how can we continue to build on this for future generations. And we'd love to get your thoughts of what is the issue, or what is the piece of the puzzle that you would like to see championed moving forward after we get the ERA.
Well, I'm a big proponent of education. And I think that a lot of people aren't aware of, they're not aware of the Equal Rights Amendment. They do not realize that everyone is not included in the Constitution. They do not realize that this issue has continued. That when the Constitution was written by these white men, Black people were enslaved. The indigenous people, they were enslaved. That women did not have any rights, and they certainly couldn't vote. And so most young people have no idea of this. And so I think that in order for us to control that narrative, we have to first make sure that this generation completely understands. And so we have to take the responsibility to ensure that this curriculum, this education curriculum of ours, is inclusive, and it's based on facts, and it's not during the month of March during Women's History Month. Right. It's not during the month of February for Black History Month, but we have to make sure that this accurate information is included in our educational curriculum throughout the entire year, because if it's not, then we're going to have to continue to shout that Black lives matter, that women's lives matter, that everybody except white men's lives matter, right? And so for me, the most important, or for me personally, the premise is about educating our young people so that they are very clear on all of the process that is entailed in making sure that we are included in the Constitution of America.
Right.
So true. And to also bring that intersectional lens, that it's not just one thing, right? It's a myriad of things that are woven in together into the fabric of our lives that are so important.
Yes, our humanity.
Yeah,
exactly. And you brought up the really critical piece of education. And I know through your work at the Shabazz Center, you are working to educate and expand the knowledge and the understanding of your parents' legacy and beyond. And would love to hear your thoughts about how the work of the Shabazz Center also helps champion the issue of equality.
Yes, we have a really dynamic team that, we've been so fortunate to just recently hire Naja Zigby Johnson, and she's a recent graduate from Harvard Divinity School. She has a master's degree, and, she is another one who's such a proponent of this Freedom School curriculum, which, is inclusive. It teaches about the indigenous people. It teaches about Native Americans. It teaches about Latinas. It teaches about women, the significant contributions that we all made to the world, so that everyone is given the same playing field, right? That they start off at first base, that they have an opportunity for self-love, that they have an opportunity to then love others, right? Because you can't love others, you can't care for or desire to make change for others until you first are able to do that for yourself. And, so these are some of the values that were instilled in our household. My mother made sure that we loved who we were as Black women, my mother made sure that her 6 daughters loved themselves as women, as people from the diaspora, as Muslims. And loving myself makes it very easy for me to love you. And if I see that there is any injustice on your part, I'm going to do whatever it takes to jump in and help. And I'm not going to rely on someone else's value of me. I'm self-reliant. And I think that's really important for, our young people, that they don't rely on others to determine their worth.
Yes, your work is so important. Thank you so much for giving us this time. And thank you for being a powerful voice in this community. We really appreciate you. And we look forward to what you're going to bring to the work of the ERA as well. Thank you.
Thank you. It's my honor and my pleasure to both of you. Thank you so much for having me.
I fight for the Equal Rights Amendment because the only way we are truly to have equality for every single American in this country is if we make bold, substantive, and structural changes to how we operate. And the ERA will do that. So we could not let this night go by without commenting on just the profound sorrow that all of us in the women's movement, all of us in the justice movement are still feeling from the loss of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She was a champion not just for women through her amazing arguing in front of the Supreme Court and her strategy of how to move the needle forward, but just as a layperson, and then as a justice on the Supreme Court, it was just amazing to have her voice. Often in recent years in the dissent, but in that dissent, it was a rallying cry to all of us. Looking at the dissent that she wrote that then launched the Ledbetter bill that demanded that there would be pay equity in organizations and pay transparency, and what that has meant for women. Her voice on civil rights and justice and equity is just unparalleled, with the exception of the great Thurgood Marshall. It is a profound loss, but it is also an inspiration because we know that she wants us and actually demands of us that we continue to march on for justice and equality for everyone. So we are profoundly saddened. It has been, almost 2 weeks since she passed, but we are still incredibly moved and inspired to keep going with this work. From a domestic area, the work that she was doing here in the U.S. and as she was a champion around the world.
So true, Kimberly. I had the good fortune of meeting her in person in 2018 as we both launched Columbia University's first women's conference called She Opened the Door. I expected just a handshake, but we ended up having a half-hour conversation about human rights. And what struck me was her humility and her dignity and grace, but also the fire with which she spoke. And we spoke about how she spent time in India talking to Justice Bhagwati about laying the ground rules for human rights legislation in India. And she really was that champion that helped us get across the finish line in India with LGBTQ rights and so many other human rights laws that are having a profound impact around the globe. And I'm sure she didn't just do this in India, but she did it in many countries around the world. As you mentioned, she was a real firecracker. We had a good laugh at the fact that there was this rapper song called Notorious that, she marched into the room to. And yet what struck me is how centered she was in her values and her convictions about equality and how she lived it every single day. So for me personally, and I think for all of us women and other organizers championing for the Equal Rights Amendment to become codified, ASAP, her voice rings in our head that women need to be in every space. Women need to be in every table. Women need to sing in every choir. And I think as we march forward and organize and get this work done, because we have to get this work done, her legacy and her passion is going to be in all of us. And as I say, she's lit our torch, and now it's time for all of us to run forward.
Welcome to Heidi Schreck, one of our board members of the ERA Coalition and the Fund for Women's Equality, and the creator of What the Constitution Means to Me, the Broadway play, well acclaimed, has toured around the country, and has joined us for our conversation with the chairs. And, honestly, because of COVID and everything, this is really kind of the first actual conversation that Mona and I have had. We've been doing one-on-ones with our board members because we can't actually have coffee. So everybody's meeting us. So this is really exciting. And Heidi, thank you so much for taking the time. You're just coming off of maternity leave to join us this evening. So wanted to talk a little bit about this play, which is really just it's an amazing piece of work, and we are very blessed. If you didn't get a chance to see it live as it was touring around the country, guess what? It's gonna be on Amazon next month, October 16th on Amazon Prime. So that's really exciting. But wanted to take a moment and just kind of to hear from you, why did you feel compelled to write this? And as you were writing it, you included the ERA, which is, we are fighting very hard to get it into the Constitution, but it's not quite there yet. But would love to hear your thoughts of, the origin of the play and its evolution to include the ERA.
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be part of this organization, and it's great to finally have a conversation with you all. I decided to write the play because as a kid, I was like a teenage debater, and I had done this contest where I traveled around the country giving speeches about the Constitution for prize money, for scholarship money. And I wanted to write a play about being a teenage girl, and that was such a important part of my life. I did it every year of high school, and I loved the Constitution. I was kind of a little zealot for the Constitution. I believed in it deeply, and the way I believed in this country. And when I decided to write a play, I thought it would be interesting to go back with the perspective I have now as a woman in my 40s and look at how I felt about this document. And so as I started to do that, I became very interested in the way the document had actually affected my life and the lives of my mom, my grandma, my great-grandma, my great-great-grandma. One of the prompts of the contest was to make the document as personal to you as possible. And of course, as a 15-year-old, that was hard for me. I was a little emotionally guarded, and I also didn't quite know what that meant. And so when I decided to do that for real, I discovered first, how deeply this document had affected my life, and second, how profoundly women were left out of this Constitution, and how the laws of our country had so often failed us. So that's how I came to the ERA too. I remember as a kid, grew up in the 70s. My mom protesting, marching, fighting for she had her little ERA button, all of that. And I remember for a long time, I thought it had been ratified. Like a lot of people, I was like, oh yeah, that works. That made it in. And I think it might have taken me until I got into college to realize that it hadn't actually been added to the Constitution. So that, of course, became a very important part of the play.
Heidi, thank you for that. We've all enjoyed watching it so much. And frankly, no matter how much we know about the Constitution, there are always things that we learn. Kimberly and I were talking about this earlier, that we both come to this work from a very personal place. And I wonder if, you touch on this very powerfully in the play, if you can talk a little bit about your personal history and your personal narrative that has really impacted how you portrayed the ERA in this play, and how life would have been different for your grandmother and your mother, had the ERA actually been, a part of our Constitution in the days when they suffered because it wasn't?
Yes. So one of the things I began to explore when I was writing is the history of domestic violence in my family. I discovered while making the play, it's a pretty common history. A lot of families have it. But on my maternal side, there was a history of my great-great-grandmother suffering in a relationship that was plagued by domestic violence, and then my grandmother, and then my mother growing up in a very abusive household, physically and sexually. And it was a very big part of my growing up because it affected my mom's life very deeply. It made her life very difficult. So I always knew it was a part of my history. It never occurred to me while I was doing the contest that it might in any way relate to the Constitution. But as I was researching, I started to realize how few protections there were in this country when it comes to sexual and physical violence toward women. And I started investigating some of the cases that had gone before the Supreme Court, particularly the case Gonzalez versus Castle Rock, where basically the Supreme Court ruled that a woman was not entitled to police protection from her partner. And while exploring this, I started to understand something about my grandmother, which I hadn't understood before, which is that my grandmother lived with her abuser for years. She watched her children be abused. She didn't leave. I never understood that. I love my grandmother deeply. She was an incredible woman, and I could never reconcile the fact that she didn't protect her kids with the woman, the strong, smart, loving, incredible woman that I knew. And when I started researching the history of laws in this country and realized how little protection she had been offered, I started to understand why my grandma didn't leave or didn't feel like she could leave. The way in which our laws don't protect women in these situations became very clear to me, and I had a deeper understanding of what she was up against. And yes, so I guess for me, I started to also understand why it was so important for my mom to fight for the Equal Rights Amendment. I understood the stakes of what she had been fighting for.
Thank you for sharing that, Heidi. Really, the lived realities of women and girls when they are not offered the protection by law is so stark. And the sad thing is that even today, there are so many women and girls who face violence, both in domestic situations as well as sexual violence, and the protections offered are just not enough. But I know that we're going to enjoy a small reading from the play, and we look forward to that because it's just a precursor to what we can actually watch on Amazon Prime October 16th. So I invite you to read this piece, and Kimberly and I are deeply grateful for your time and being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. My mom and my aunt are the ones who reported their stepfather to the police when they were teenage girls because my grandma Betty was too scared to do it. They had been born a little further out of the penumbra than my grandma. They were born after women had the right to vote. Also, my mom had a woman teacher who took her aside and taught her this newly fashionable word, feminist. When my mom's stepfather found out he had been reported, he got his constitutionally protected gun, he rounded up his family, and he threatened to kill them. And my grandma Betty finally decided, in spite of the fact that she had inherited the pretty logical belief that her life did not matter in the eyes of the law, in spite of that, she decided to take her children and run away. The police showed up for my family. It was a small town. They were white. They arrested my mom's stepfather, but my grandma was too scared to testify against him. So my mom did that too at age 15, And then my grandma Betty said that she was lying. She wasn't lying. Her stepfather was sentenced to 30 years in prison. He served 2. Sorry, I'm going to go back because that sound, sorry. She wasn't lying. Her stepfather was sentenced to 30 years in prison. He served 2. When I think about how brave my mom and my aunt were as teenage girls, well, it gives me such respect for them, but it also makes me think about the fact that progress doesn't only move one way. I've learned so much from younger people lately. You all seem so much braver than I remember being when I was your age, more compassionate. You certainly have a more sophisticated understanding of gender. Sometimes I feel like you're shining a light backwards into the darkness so I can follow you into the future. I've struggled my whole life to forgive my grandma for not protecting my mom. I don't know if I can forgive her, but that's also really confusing because I loved my grandma so much. We all loved her. My mom loved her. My aunts and uncles loved her. And the Grandma Betty I knew is not the same woman who refused to protect her kids. The Grandma Betty I knew loved us all like crazy. She gave her whole life to her kids, her grandkids, her great-grandkids. She would have done anything for us. She would have thrown herself in front of a truck for me. So I don't know how to make sense of my 2 grandmothers. Except while I've been making this, I've realized how many of us are forced to be 2 people in this culture. Something I learned actually from a younger person, a younger feminist, that helps me understand my grandma just a little bit better, is they taught me about this concept called covert resistance. Covert resistance is the idea that sometimes seemingly passive, victim-like behaviors can be the sanest and smartest response to living in a violent culture, in a culture and a country that has made it absolutely clear it has no interest in protecting you. Covert resistance doesn't really fit into our traditional narratives of heroism. It involves a lot of tiny daily actions. It involves things like a woman feeding her kids, saving money for them, helping them get a good education. It can also involve less positive things like getting sick and not leaving. Because in this country, the moment a woman decides to leave is the moment her life and her kids' lives are in the most danger. When my Grandma Betty died, my uncle found $50,000 hidden underneath her mattress with a note that said to give it to all of her kids. All of this just makes me think that maybe it's not helpful to think of the Constitution as a crucible in which we're all battling it out together. Because if the Constitution is a crucible, then the people who have always been in power, who have always dominated, always oppressed, men, white people, are going to keep dominating and oppressing. Maybe we could think of the Constitution like a mother, a Constitution whose job it is to actively look out for all of us. You know, there are so many countries that have those kinds of constitutions, active, positive rights constitutions that protect human rights. 179 constitutions have gender protections written into them. Ours is not one of them. Our Constitution is really, really old. Thank you.
What an incredible night. I hope that you have enjoyed all of the conversations that Mona and I have had with our supporters all across this country who have been with us to make sure that the ERA is actually codified into the Constitution and upheld moving forward. But we know that the work to get to that point is going to be hard and it's going to take a lot. And we thank you all so much for the support that you have already given tonight and hope that you have been inspired to give and give again. And also tell your friends and colleagues and people in your network about our conversation and about our fight and encourage them to support our work as well. We can't do this alone and we're counting on you. So, on behalf of all of us at the ERA Coalition and the Fund for Women's Equality, we thank you for joining us for our Meet the Chairs conversation this evening. We are so grateful to have all of you work with all of us for equality for everyone. Thank you all so much. Good night.
Way-o, 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 I've been walking with my face turned to the sun. Way-o, weight on my shoulders, pulling my gun. Well, I got eyes in the back of my head, just in case I have to run. Do what I can when I can, while I can for my people. While the clouds roll back and the stars fill the night, that's why I wanna stand up, take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home, far across the river. Can you hear freedom calling, calling me to answer? Gonna keep on keeping on, I can feel it in my bones. And I know what's around the bend might be hard to face, 'cause I'm alone. And I just might fail, but Lord knows I tried. Sure as stars fill up the sky,